after Hannah's song in 1 Samuel 2, remember that? Verses 1 through 10, Hannah sings this song about God. An incredible song, really, of praise to the God of knowledge, the holy God, the one who cannot be compared with any other. There's no one like the Lord our God, the God who loves to reach down and lift up the humble and the poor out of the dust, and who brings the lofty low. And she sings at the end, remember that, how she sings about this is a God who's going to raise up a king. He's going to give strength to his anointed, to his Messiah. Like after that song, especially coming out of the book of Judges, right? The time of the Judges when there was no king. You think, wow, we're gonna come right to the king, right? That's what you might think. We're ready for it. The song certainly gets you looking that direction, tells you what kind of king you ought to be looking for. But before you get there, the author doesn't want to move that quickly. First, the author wants to show you something about the boy, about Hannah's son, Samuel. Do you remember him? We're introduced to him already. Given to this barren woman in answer to her prayers, someone that she gave back to the Lord to serve in God's house. This little boy Samuel, remember the first thing that it really said about him is that when he got there, he worshiped the Lord. Even as a little guy, he was already a worshiper of the Lord. Well, he's not the only one in the house of God, right? Because there's the high priest in the house of God. And do you remember who he is? Remember that guy? He's the one who saw Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 1, praying quietly, pouring out her heart to God. And what did he conclude? That she's drunk. How long are you going to go on being drunk, he says to her, which gives you probably some indication, right, of the spiritual condition of people, certain people at least, who were around God's house during this time. It was a very terrible time in God's house. Well, that guy, Eli, also had sons of his own, right? So he's got Samuel as a boy who's a true worshiper of the Lord from his early days. But Eli also has sons of his own. And we've seen this in the Bible before, that one of the best ways to teach or to get us to see things is to set people or groups in contrast to one another. And I want to highlight that in 1 Samuel chapter 2 for you to get you to see it in the text for yourself. So look at 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 11. Then Elkanah, now that's Samuel's dad, Hannah's husband. Remember the one who's like, oh, aren't I better to you than 10 sons? That guy. He went home. But the boy, Samuel, ministered to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest. So there you got Samuel, true worshiper of the Lord. He's ministering in the house of God as a little guy. Now verse 12. Now the sons of Eli, see the contrast? Now the sons of Eli, on the other hand, were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. Now that's pretty strong stuff, right? I mean, what were they doing? The sons of the high priest, what were they doing? If you read the next section, basically, people are bringing sacrifices, animals, down to sacrifice to the Lord in worship of the Lord. And what do? They basically take whatever meat from the animals they want for themselves to gorge their fleshly appetites. They treat God's sacrifices, the table of the Lord, if you will, as with contempt, as if it's worth nothing. They don't care. Why? Because they do not know the Lord. These are worthless men. But then, verse 18, back to Samuel. Samuel, on the other hand, was ministering before the Lord. A boy clothed with a linen ephod. And then you read about his mom and how she'd come down every year and she'd bring him these little robes and everything. Really nice story. And then, verse 22, though, you got to go back to Eli's house. Now, Eli was very old, and he kept hearing all that his sons were doing. And what they were doing wasn't good, right? What they were doing with the table was terrible, with the sacrifices, but it wasn't just that. And look at what it says here, verse 22. How they lay with the women who were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Here you have women serving in God's house, and these worthless sons of Eli are committing sexual immorality in God's house with these women. And Eli hears of it and he says, why are you doing these things, my sons? This isn't good, what I hear. In verse 25, he says, if someone sins against a man, God will mediate for him. will go between. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him? Interesting. But they wouldn't listen to the voice of their father, for it was the will of the Lord to put those guys to death. But not Samuel, right? Verse 26. Now the young man Samuel, on the other hand, continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man. So you see it here. Here's the high priest and his sons, and you see this like from the very beginning, the priestly system has been defective. The priests have been defective from the very beginning. And now you've got Eli, the high priest, with sons who are horrible men. But as they're on the decline, and even we're finding out now it's God's will to put this family, these boys, to death for what they're doing. Samuel, on the other hand, is growing in stature and in favor with God and with man. And this leads you into the end of 1 Samuel chapter 2, where this man of God, comes to Eli and delivers a word of prophecy, a word of promise about what God's going to do to Eli's house. And if you read it, it is devastating. It is a devastating word to Eli about what God's going to do to him and his family. God's going to rip the family apart. He's going to kill, he's going to put to death Hophni and Phinehas, the two sons, on the same day. Not one of Eli's descendants is ever going to reach old age. There's going to be a time when only one of them is even left just to weep his eyes out. It's going to be horrible, the future for Eli and his family. But it's not just a promise about that, because 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 35 says, "And I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, who will do according to what is in my heart and in my mind, and I will build him a sure house, and he'll go in and out before my anointed forever." That God's heart is to have a faithful priesthood. And it's not going to be Eli and his family. And our eyes are now on Samuel, who's growing up in the temple serving the Lord. And then you come to 1 Samuel chapter 3, and we find now the young man Samuel was ministering to the Lord under Eli. And the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Remember, this is a terrible time, and the prophetic word is really rare. There was no frequent vision. God wasn't giving the prophetic word like he had during the days of Moses and when there's no prophetic word, the people perish. Okay, things go terribly when God isn't giving his message, his words to his people, and so it's rare, and that's the setting for 1 Samuel chapter 3. Eli now is old, and Samuel is living there in the house of God where the ark of God was. And one night, Eli and Samuel are there, and the Lord, in verse 4, called Samuel, and Samuel says, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli, and he said, "Here I am, Eli. You called me." But Eli said, "I didn't call. Go back to bed. Lay down again." So he went, and then the Lord called again, "Samuel." Samuel got up, ran to Eli, said, "Hey, Eli, what do you want?" Because Samuel didn't yet know the Lord in this way. The word of the Lord, this is in verse 7, had not yet been revealed to him. He hadn't been receiving God's word or speaking God's word like as a prophet. And so this is new. And so verse 8, "And the Lord called Samuel again the third time. And he arose and went to Eli." He's like, "Here I am. What do you want?" And this time Eli tells him, "Listen, if you hear that again, just say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant hears.'" So Samuel went back and he lay down, and the Lord called, as he did at the other time, "Samuel, Samuel." And Samuel said, "Speak, Lord, for your servant hears." And then God gives Samuel the prophetic word. So here you have this boy that's kind of being raised up in the temple, growing in favor with God and man, and the priesthood's on the way down, and maybe Samuel's going to maybe serve as a priest, but he's also coming in as a prophet. It seems like God's starting to give him revelation, give him a word, and this word's not going to be an easy one for him to hear because it's going to be about Eli. How God's going to destroy Eli's house. And so Samuel goes back to bed, and you can imagine he knows that Eli knows that God was speaking to him. What's he going to say? And so Eli comes to Samuel, and he wants to know the next day what Samuel heard, and of course Samuel doesn't want to tell him. So what does Eli do? Verse 17 of chapter 3 says, "Don't hide this from me, may God do so to you, and more also if you hide anything from me. Of anything that God said. And so what does Samuel do? He tells him everything, right? Because he doesn't want that stuff to happen to him. He didn't hide anything. And Eli hears the devastating word, not just from the man of God in chapter 2, but also even from this boy, from this young man, Samuel. And he says, it's the Lord. Let God do what seems good to him. And verse 19, 1 Samuel 3, and Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and let none of his words fall to the ground. And Samuel begins to speak God's word to God's people, and he's being raised up as a leader, not just in the house of God, but one who's delivering God's word to God's people. But what about those words of prophecy about Eli and his family? Coming to 1 Samuel chapter 4, and the sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, have this idea because they've got some enemies, the Philistines, that they want to go and they want to attack. And so they go and they actually get the Ark of God, which is about like God's presence. Okay? And they say, well, let's take the Ark out into battle, because if we take God out into battle, surely we're going to win. And the Philistines, they see the Ark coming and they think, oh, they're bringing God out after us, and so they're shaking, but let's fight. And the Philistines win. They take the Ark of God. They kill Hophni and Phinehas on the very same day, just like the man of God had said. And then a man runs back to Eli. And Eli, his heart is probably shaking. He knows his sons are out in battle, and he's so concerned about the Ark of God. And this man comes running to him with a message. And 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 13, when he arrived, Eli was sitting on his seat by the road watching, for his heart trembled for the Ark of God. And when the man came into the city and told the news, all the city cried out. Eli hears this, says, what's the news? What's the news? And then the man hurried and came and told Eli. Verse 15, now Eli was 98 years old. His eyes were set so that he couldn't see. And the man said to Eli, I am he who has come from the battle. I fled from the battle today. He said, how'd it go, my son? He says, Israel's fled. Your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the Ark of God has been captured. In verse 18, as soon as he mentioned the Ark of God, Eli fell over backwards from his seat by the side of the gate, and his neck was broken, and he died. For the man was old and fat, old and heavy, which maybe is an indication that he didn't just not restrain his sons enough. Maybe he even was participating in the gorging of his flesh. I don't know. But in any event, Eli's sons die in fulfillment of the word of the Lord. Eli is dead. And now his daughter-in-law, the wife of Phinehas, who was pregnant, was about to give birth. And when she heard the news that the Ark of God was captured, she gave birth to a son and calls him Ichabod, saying, the glory has departed from Israel. The glory has departed from Israel. And this is the downfall of Eli and his house. And the stage is set. Samuel is being raised up in favor with God and man to lead the people of God. He seems to be coming up as a faithful priest, but also a faithful prophet in the house of God. And our hopes are high that he'll be able to lead the people of God in obedience to the will of God.